Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you live from Beijing. Let's move to Syria, where Turkey is not holding back in its cross-border operation in northeastern Syria. And of course, there's already a lot of discussions about what's coming next. U.S. President Donald Trump has already threatened sanctions against Turkey, though his decision to withdraw U.S. troops from northern Syria was much criticized from both sides of the aisle in Congress in Washington. Let's take a look at all the latest development.
Dramatic changes in the Middle East in the past week since Turkish President Erdogan launched the assault on northern Syria.
He could do it in a soft manner, he could do it in a very tough manner, and if he does it unfairly, he's going to pay a very big economic price.
President Trump on Monday signed an order authorizing sanctions against Turkey in response to its military operations in Syria. He said the U.S. would also suspend negotiations for a $100 billion trade deal and raise tariffs on steel imports from Turkey to 50%. This new move came days after Turkey launched military operations and also followed Trump's order over the weekend to withdraw around 1,000 U.S. troops from northern Syria.
Just about everybody outside of this. We want to bring our soldiers back home. These are the endless wars. And we're not fighting, we're policing to a large extent. We're policing in certain areas. We're not police, we're...
It seemed Turkey's action got a tacit understanding by Washington, dismissing criticism that this would leave the Kurds open to attack. But as Turkish soldiers push deeper in Syria, the U.S. seems to be making a U-turn in its attitude. There are also many other voices against the Turkish offensive. China called on Turkey to stop the military operation. Russia urged foreign troops to pull out of Syria. The Arab League also condemned the operation, while NATO allies, Germany and France, said they will suspend exports of weapons to Turkey. The area swept by the offensive was controlled by the U.S.-backed Kurdish group YPG, which Ankara considers a terrorist organization. Airstrikes, together with a ground offensive, were launched last Wednesday.
We'll advance 30 to 35 kilometers into the territory, suitably to the safe zone map as we declared before.
The Kurds used to be Washington's main regional partner in the fight against ISIL. Marginalized for decades, they have been asking Damascus for more autonomous power. But on Sunday, the Kurdish administration said they have reached a deal with Damascus on Syrian troop deployment to confront Ankara's offensive. It certainly seems to be a quick game of repositioning and realignment, but it is uncertain how regional players would work in the long run with dwindling U.S. presence in the region.
And on the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Syria, let's loop in our panelists. In Istanbul, we have Metin Gülkran, who is a security analyst and columnist for Al Monitor's Turkey Post in Washington, D.C., Edmund Garib, a Middle East scholar and analyst. Last but not least, in Boston, Dr. Jim Walsh, Senior Research Associate at MIT's Security Studies Program. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Very complicated over there. Many different kinds of factors playing an impact on the region. But let's start from what exactly are the fundamental picture below the surface phenomena. Let me go to you, Dr. Walsh, your analysis, briefly.
Yeah, I would say the fundamental issue here is Turkey sees as its vital national interest that it combat the Kurds. And so it's going to put up with sanctions, it's going to put up with diplomatic isolation as long as it achieves what it considers to be its top priority. And so I think we're going to see more of the same. Eventually, Syria is going to, and the Russians will move in and put an end to this or limit it. But right now, Turkey's taking advantage of its opportunity to pursue its foreign policy.
Mr. Gülkran, from the Turkish perspective, is it afraid, quote unquote, of sanctions, any kind of sanctions coming from the U.S. right now?
Yeah, I mean, this is the seventh day of the operation, and around 1/5 of area Ankara intended to control has been right now under the full control of Turkish military and Turkey-backed Sunni armed groups. For almost 2 days, we don't see the expansion of the operation on the ground. The military operations seem to stall, and right now diplomatic bargainings and negotiations seems to start. And then, as you said, Mr. Trump, the U.S. president, he implied that, he emphasized that he does not want to militarily confront with Turkey's military operation in Syria, but he said that economically and diplomatically, I am not supporting this operation, and I will be the one trying to stop Turkish military's expansion in the northeast of Syria. So sanction threat is real, and then as far as I see, more sanctions are on the way, coming.
I see. Mr. Garib, now, we don't want to be naive here, because there are also a lot of things going on between the United States and Turkey besides what's going on in Syria, besides the Kurds issue. It's about trade, it's about what role to play in the Middle East, it's about regional power vis-a-vis allies of the United States in the region. So, Mr. Garib, how should we read the latest rounds? Is it purely about Syria or much more than that?
Clearly, Syria, clearly the Kurds are very important factors. In fact, they are the major factors here. Nevertheless, there are a lot of other aspects, there are a lot of other issues involved. As you pointed out, there's, first of all, the tensions that have existed between the United States and Turkey over a number of issues over the past few years, whether it was over the Gulen, the handing over of Gulen, who the Turkish government accused of trying to overthrow the government, or whether it was the arrest of some Americans who were working for the U.S. And Turks working for the U.S. Diplomatic posts in Turkey, or whether it had to do with the conflict over Cyprus and you know, the search for oil and gas with Greece and Turkey. And but of course, the issue of the Kurds is seen by the Turks, whether perhaps it may be sometimes a bit exaggerated. Nevertheless, it's seen by the Turks as an existential threat to the unity and the territorial integrity of the Turkish state. And of course, there are the political ambitions of the Turkish leadership, and there are the concerns about the presence of large numbers of Syrian refugees in Turkey. The Turkish public has not been very happy recently.
Right.
And of course, if we go back and take a look at the result of the Turkish elections, particularly in Ankara and Istanbul, where the AK party, President Erdogan's party, lost, all of these are important factors.
And this going together, Dr. Walsh, with the withdrawal of troops by the U.S. side in Syria and some of the other areas. And that has also created a debate inside Washington, because the White House believes so, however, other factors do not necessarily so. So this is much more than just what's going on in the Middle East. It's about overall U.S. strategy toward the region. Has that really evolved by nature? Dr. Walsh.
Yes, so does the U.S. have a strategy? I would guess not. I think we sort of go, given our current administration, we go from sort of day-to-day action, reaction, this and that, tweet, announcement. So here's where I would draw a distinction, though. You know, a policy can be a good idea or it can be a bad idea. I personally thought the U.S. should not be in Syria to begin with. I thought that was a bad idea. And so I'm not particularly upset that the U.S. is withdrawing from Syria. But there's a separate question in addition to, is it a good policy, is it a bad policy? That is, how well do you execute the policy you have? You can have a great idea, but if it's poorly executed and poorly handled, then it's going to be a mess. And I think that's what we have right now. The president did not work out arrangements with the Kurds in advance. He did not warn the U.S. military that it would have to, you know, leave on a dime with little or no notice. I mean, there's a process for dealing with this where you take care of your allies, it's orderly, people plan for it, and you execute it.
Right.
You don't just announce it and pull out in a day.
But
otherwise, you get what we have right now, which is chaos and violence.
But Mr. Gutran, we all understand that the U.S. slogan, America First. So what Dr. Walsh just mentioned may not necessarily, his plan may not necessarily go with the spirit of Washington today. So what does that mean for regional powers? you know, when you see a United States straying from this side or another side, unpredictable, will Turkey have much bigger chance in terms of achieving what they consider as important goals in the region?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, fully agreeing to Mr. Walsh. I mean, it's in fact a debate within the U.S. I mean, it's a domestic politics-related debate. And then Syria issue is a good political instrument for Mr. Trump for two things. First, to attack Obama administration, and then he is saying that these are the problems that I inherited from Obama administration. And the second time, this is a good political instrument for him, like an kind of instrument for domestic political consumption to directly attack the establishment or security bureaucracy in the state. So right now we can't talk about the U.S. having a strategy or policy about Syria. There is a kind of tribal warfare between Trump's White House, Congress, Pentagon, State Department, CENTCOM. Lots of different institutions are saying and doing lots of different things. So there is a kind of strategic confusion here. Coming to the regional issue, when Russians appeared militarily in Syria in October 2015, particularly U.S. analysts and U.S. Experts were saying that Putin was a tactician. He is not a kind of strategist, and Russian forces cannot stay there more than 1 year. But right now, after all these debates on the U.S. side of the story, we see that Mr. Putin and Russia has been emerging as the new game builder, new regulator, system-level regulator in Syria. And then if you, the timing of this issue, where is Mr. Putin right now? He is in a kind of very historical trip to Syria, Saudi Arabia. Then he will go to the other Gulf countries. And then I think on the ground, yes, and that's right. And then on the ground, Russia is the big winner. And in the diplomatic fashion, with this, coincidentally, Mr. Putin's historic trip to the Gulf region and the things that are happening on the ground in Syria with U.S. withdrawal and Mr. Trump's isolationist policies, I think Russia will be the one. So that's why Ankara will be looking for right now Moscow and trying to engage with Moscow much more the deeper fashion than D.C.
Mr. Garib, do you think there is fundamentally a grand shift of power inside the Middle East, particularly regarding the issue of Syria, the role of the U.S., the role of Russia? And what about the role of the regional powers? Who's likely to be the biggest winner? Will the decision made by the Trump administration once the election comes to an end also shift to other directions or shift back to the earlier version? These are all unpredictables.
Before I respond to the regional aspect, let me just say a couple of words about the American position. Basically, a lot of people here in Washington, many other parts of the world are saying this was a major surprise. Well, in reality, it should not have been a surprise. President Trump said in last December, and he has been saying since when he was a candidate, since he's got into the White House, that he wants to bring an end to these endless wars that have been disastrous for the United States in terms of the military as well human and economic costs. Trillions, he said $8 trillion. In fact, the cost may be higher than that. Over the 3 different wars or 4 different wars if we take Libya into account. So that aspect of it, and in fact U.S. officials told U.S. media without using their names that the clash, there's a storm brewing between Turkey and the Kurds, and that this means that the U.S. may not be able to continue to stay on the ground. This was said a few weeks ago, and more recently as far back as about a week and a half ago. So basically this should not have been a surprise to the Kurds. After Afrin, especially to the Kurds, that also should have been taken into account. As to the regional changes, there's no doubt that this is a very significant development. Well, this is probably the most significant development, but came about as a result of a number of other developments that both of your guests have referred to. One, first of all, whether the U.S. had any coherent policy towards Syria, whether there were any real objectives. The objectives were confused. There was divisions within the U.S. about what the U.S. wanted out of Syria. But at the same time, there were also realities, new realities were created on the ground by the Syrian army and its allies, Russia, Iran, and as well as Hezbollah. And so that new reality that basically Syria is winning the war and regaining control over most of its territory. These were also significant shifts. Plus, the pivot to Asia is also another factor that may be in the minds of some U.S. politicians.
That's exactly what I want to ask the other guests. We're only having 1 minute left, so 30 seconds for the other two. Mr. Gurchan, what do you think will be the latest situation in Syria, looking at all the changes just being mentioned in the program?
Right now, diplomatic bargainings, and Russia and Mr. Putin will have the last say. Particularly, airspace dominance is extremely important. You know, if you want to militarily operate in north of Syria, then you should have an absolute airspace dominance. And the thing that I'm waiting is whether U.S. Air Force is going to withdraw from northeast of Syria. And I say that if U.S. Air Force withdraw from northeast of Syria, then it's impossible for U.S. Air Force to keep their airspace dominance in Iraq.
So there will be a kind of... So, Mr. Walsh, we have 30 seconds left for you as well. 30 seconds for everybody. Mr. Walsh, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think in the near term, it's going to be messy. The Kurds are going to take the biggest hit here. They're going to have to, obviously they're dealing with Syria, but in the medium term, that's going to find an equilibrium. It's going to, settle up. The Turks and the Syrians aren't going to continue to fight each other if they fight each other at all. So we'll get some stability. I think in the long term, the question that we have not raised here that I cannot answer is, what about NATO? What about Turkey and NATO? That's the longer term issue that this may have an impact on as this works itself out.
Thank you very much for the three of you. We're really running out of time. Jim Walsh, Edmond Garib, and Metin Gurchan. Really appreciate it. Thank you. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us, World Insight CGTN, into our search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook. From me, Tian Wei, and everybody on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for more insights across China and around the world. Good night.